So we're going to talk a little bit about how your programs are structured and syntax. And this is definitely a review. You guys should be familiar with this. But typically you have a namespace declaration at the top. You may have a using statement. It depends on what you're doing in your main method. Okay? If you are going to write to the console or read from the console, you have to include using system. Okay. The namespace declaration just gives your code its own little unique name or virtual area to run in. You will have a class, and inside the class, at the bare minimum, you will have a main method. Every single program has to have one main method. You cannot have more than one. And by default, that is where the program starts running. It looks for the main method and it starts to run. Inside the main method, you will have commands. And throughout the program, you may have comments. And comments, if they're going to be multi-line, they are created like this, where you've got a slash and an asterisk. Then you can have multiple lines of comments, and a asterisk slash is how you end it. As far as the syntax goes, what you need to remember is C# is case sensitive. So upper and lower case do make a difference. And if you're creating variables, it considers the variables to be different if they're in upper and lower case. Your statements or your commands have to end in a semicolon. Your text phrases, which are called strings, have to be in double quotes. And for your comments, we already kind of looked at a multi-line comment, which is like this, with the slash, asterisk, asterisk, slash. You can also do a single line comment with 2 slashes. And that can be on its own line, or you can actually put it after code. I find it useful to use comments, whether they're single line or multi-line. If there's a section of code that I want to comment out, because maybe I want to try something else, I will put the comments in, I will code something else, and then if I change my mind, I still have that original code to go back to. Because I don't like to type too much. So anytime I am struggling with something, I have found it's easier just to comment it out because then it's still there if I want to use it. Let's see. We already talked about that part. As far as the program goes, it will execute your commands from the top down. That is built in, and it starts executing at main. When you compile, and it's converting everything into that intermediate language, it ignores comments. So any line or any little segment that is a comment will be ignored. As far as programming standards go, the standard is one statement per line, and you should indent, okay, 4 spaces. Now, there are languages like Python where indentation is critical, and if you don't indent correctly, you get syntax errors. C# is not like that. In fact, this mess would actually run. So as you can see, indentation is poor indentation is not going to be a syntax error in C#. It just makes it super hard to read, which is why it is a standard to indent. Okay. And as far as errors go, there are really three different types of errors. There's syntax errors, which, you guys are going to find right away because, you'll run a build and it's not going to execute your program. It'll display a list of errors instead. And Visual Studio does make it pretty easy for you to find and fix errors. You basically just double click, and I would double click on the first error. It'll take your cursor to that error, and then you can fix it. And quite often, fixing one error will resolve all of the errors or at least several of the errors that are in your list. Okay, and always start with the top error. Runtime errors. So these typically happen because of user input. And this is why we use the try-catch exception handling, because it'll handle these types of errors and allow the program to continue running. Logic errors, they can be a little more difficult to find, which is why you really need to test your code. You need to figure out what the output should be, and then you need to run a test to make sure it creates the proper output. And if it doesn't, chances are you have a logic error. And so here's an example of a logic error. And I will let you guys figure out what the problem is. If you click the arrow, you can see the answer.